Hi everyone, Jessica here and welcome back to my channel. So today's video we're going to be taking a look at issue 207. So this is the newest issue of Simply Cards and Papercraft. So the free gift this month is this Nautical Collection stamp set with this seahorse die as well. And this is from one of the signature collections from Sara Davies. So as we always do, let's take a look in the magazine at the sort of inspiration pages to use this stamp set and die. So you can see lots of sort of variations of techniques and what you can do with this. So we've got a bit of like inlay and die cutting going on here. You've got sort of different colouring in, different shaped cards, lots of different inspiration as they always do. So it give you a really good start on sort of thinking about the kinds of cards and projects that you can design using this stamp set and die. They usually have this second section as well, so you've got different kinds of concept cards, again lots of different ways, creating backgrounds, creating focal points with this particular stamp set. So in this video I'm going to be creating 2 cards using this set, so let's go ahead and get started on the first card. So for this first card, what I'm going to do is firstly create a background. So I've got 3 shades of Distress Oxide ink here, and I'm just putting this down onto a mixed media mat, and I'm going to be creating a nice sort of watercolour background to give us that really nice sort of ocean themed background. So I've got Tumbled Glass, Salty Ocean and Blueprint Sketch here. So I've put down the Tumbled Glass and the Salty Ocean first. I was going to go in with the dark, but I decided I didn't want to sort of mix the colours too much to begin with, so I'm just sticking with those 2 lighter colours. So I'm just spritzing it so it beads nicely on the craft mat, and I'm simply just going to press my cardstock into the inky pool of water here. So the cardstock I'm using is the Hunky Dory Ink Me. This is a 300 GSM, and I find this does sort of work really well. It does absorb a really good amount of water. So I'm going to try and build up the layers a little bit here. So I've got my first layer down. If you find that your ink is kind of pooling towards the edges, obviously the cardstock is going to bend slightly and it's going to sort of travel to the edges that you can see here. All I'm doing is just taking a clean paper towel and I'm just kind of letting the paper towel absorb that extra bit of liquid. And all we're going to do then is just heat set it, like I said, in between layers, and that's going to build up our layers really nicely. So once my first layer is basically dry, I'm just going to pop it straight back into our inky mixture. And what I'm going to try and do is dry some of these areas that have got sort of heavier spots of water in it. By doing that, it'll create sort of nice dark edges to that kind of layer. You'll be able to see the difference in this, and it just gives it a really, really nice effect. So I do this a couple of times with this particular sort of pool of ink, so with that Salty Ocean and that Tumbled Glass, and then I sort of come in with my Blueprint Sketch, so the darker colour, just to kind of add a little bit more sort of depth of colour into this background. So with the Blueprint Sketch, I was just thinking about doing it around the edges, and you can see that's what I'm doing here, just sort of putting it on the edges and just kind of tipping the paper. I'm adding a little bit more water onto it to help it kind of flow and get some drips and things. But what I do end up doing is sort of putting the whole of the paper into it and just kind of incorporating the colours a lot more. So you can see here they are mixing together really nicely, and by adding that extra water it means that you're going to get those sort of extra marks. You're going to get the ink in the places that perhaps it doesn't naturally want to flow into. But again, maybe think about the cardstock you're using and how much water that cardstock can actually absorb. Like I said, this is the Ink Me 300 GSM cardstock, and I find for the amount of water that I like to use and sort of how watery I make it, this cardstock is perfect. Just like before, I'm going to heat set this in between layers, and I do end up going back more into then that Salty Ocean and that Tumbled Glass, because I did find that the Blueprint Sketch did kind of overpower it, and I lost some of that sort of depth that I built up in those first few layers using those 2 previous colours. So I do kind of go back and forth a little bit, but I'm really pleased with the final result that I get for this particular background. So you can see here, this is my final background, and I'm just finally heat setting it, and I think it works so well together. So I love creating backgrounds like this because every single one of them comes out differently. Every single one is unique. I also really love this craft mat. So this is by Lisa Horton, and it's perfect for creating backgrounds like this, and it cleans up so easily. So with this background now, what I wanted to do was just make it just a little bit more interesting. So I decided to add some embossing powder. Normally when you apply embossing powder, you want to apply it to a sticky surface. That way the embossing powder will stick to it and you're able to melt it. What I'm actually doing here is just flicking some water onto my background. So that will react a little bit with our inks already. And our embossing powder will stick to the water. However, what's going to happen is when we come to heat set this, because of the force that the heat tool is blowing out that hot air, it is going to blow the majority of this embossing powder off. And that's really what I wanted. I wanted to have as a random splatters as what you get by doing that technique, but then I didn't also want sort of big spots of embossing powder like you can see here. So the embossing powder will kind of only stick to certain bits of it, and when you get your heat tool hot enough, it will sort of instantly melt that embossing powder, and that's really what I wanted to go for. Now I'm just going to heat set it with my heat tool, and like I said, it's going to blow a lot of this embossing powder off. So our final result is just going to have that hint of embossing powder in certain places. So you can see here, I'm just finishing up the last bit of the melting of this embossing powder. And you can see I've got a couple of splotches, obviously where my heat tool has gotten to such a heat where it has melted that embossing powder straight away. So really, I kind of wish I turned it off and then sort of carried on melting it. But you can see on the left-hand side, only small sections of that embossing powder, which is what I wanted. Like I said, maybe I should have let my heat tool cool down a little bit before I started on that right-hand side. But I do really love how this background is finished. So next up, we're going to do our stamping. So I've taken this Porthole stamp, and I'm going to be using this red brick Prism World of Colour ink pads. This is a dye ink, and I did try a couple of different ink pads, and I did find that this dye pad worked best for this image. So I decided to use a coloured stamp. So with some of the inspiration that is in the magazine, that they are stamping a lot of these images in sort of coloured inks, and I really like the idea of that. Sometimes I don't always want to sit down and do some colouring in. So I'm trying to use my ink pads, especially because I've got some new colours, trying to use them a little bit more. So now that I've got that image stamped nicely, I'm going to go ahead and put this centre stamp in here. I actually thought this was one stamp, but it's nice to see that it is actually two separate stamps. So you could use this Porthole stamp, you could cut it out, and you could have it sort of seeing something beyond it, which would be really nice. So this stamp here, you've got the anchor, and then you have got that sentiment in around the anchor. So the sentiment reads, wishing you smooth sailing, and I really love all of the sentiments that have been included. I'm going to be taking another one of my new ink pads to my range of Prism watercolour inks, and this is the Nautical Blue. So this is a really nice sort of deep blue, and I'm just going to stamp that, like you can see here, directly in the middle. So I want to get as many stamped images onto this card as possible without sort of overwhelming the card. So what I'm going to do now is just stamp out a couple of the other images that I'm going to be fussy cutting. So again, the cardstock is the same that I've used throughout everything else that we've done in this video so far. And this is the Colour Me 300 GSM. It is a nice smooth cardstock, so I find that you can stamp onto it really, really nicely. So the first image I've taken is the boat, and I'm going to be inking this again in that nautical blue colour, just to sort of keep in with that theme. All of these stamps have actually stamped really, really well. I didn't necessarily need to use my stamping platform, even though I do obviously go in just for an extra little bit of pressure on one of the sections. I really would have been happy with the result I would have gotten with an acrylic block. It just so happened that I've still got it out. So I'm going to be stamping 3 more images. So we're going to be doing the starfish and a couple of the shells as well, just to sort of add a little bit more onto our card. So just, again, I want to try and incorporate as many of these images as possible, like I said, without overwhelming our card. So for these images, I'm going to go back to that red brick colour. And again, it's stamped really, really well with these. Again, you don't need to have a stamping platform to use these particular stamps because they worked really well. So now I've got my images all stamped, I can go ahead and fussy cut these. So for any of you who've watched any of my previous videos where I've talked about these Tim Holtz left-handed scissors, it's going to sound really cheesy, but these have actually changed my craft in life. So I was always horrible at fussy cutting because I am left-handed. My scissors that I have are all right-handed, and I struggled so much to get a good fussy cut. So much so where I never ever did it. I would put it into my scan and cut machine. And to be perfectly honest with you, I have been fussy cutting as much as possible and not using my scan and cut machine as much because I'm trying to get used to being able to do it. And it really does make a huge difference of the scissors you are using. So if you are left-handed and you struggle with your scissors, please take a look at these scissors. I will leave a link down below where I got them from. They are really amazing. So now I've got all the fussy cutting done of these images, we're going to go ahead and start looking at some of the other elements and bringing this card together. So what I've done is I took our Porthole stamp and I used a circle nesting die to cut that image out, and I've also created a frame to go around this image, and this was cut from just some matte silver cardstock because I wanted that to match in and tie in with the embossing powder on our background. So I'm going to cut almost like a porthole out of our background. So I'm taking the largest nesting die and I'm off-centering this to the left-hand side of my background. And then what we can do is raise up our background off our card base. And then that's going to give our card just a little bit of dimension and kind of fit in with that idea of it being like a porthole. So I've just run this through my die cutter machine and I'm just really carefully going to peel off this masking tape just so I don't rip the background and wreck my background panel. So what we've also been left with now is this circle, which is obviously really nicely patterned, and I'm actually going to save this to create a really simple card. That's going to be the next card I create, just to show you that obviously there is never any waste when it comes to crafting. So now we've got this cut out, we're going to go ahead and stamp some images directly onto our background just to kind of fill some of those spaces, and again use some more of the stamps from the stamp set. The next image we're going to stamp is going to be that lighthouse image, and I'm just going to have that off to the right hand side. So I'm using my stamping platform just so I can get the position of it right, and I can stamp it to see sort of how much I want to stamp it, how much of the image I want to see. So I want this to be kind of sort of in the background, just as sort of a background feature. So like I said, I'm just having this off to the side. So looking at the design, maybe it would have been better because the image is kind of flowing to the right. Maybe I should have put it on that side, but I'm happy with the card turned out, so I'm not worried about that. So I've taken this nautical blue stamp again, and I haven't stamped the entire image. I've stamped different sections, and what I've done is I've pressed really lightly because I wanted to sort of not get that full crisp image. I just want that impression to be there. So I've kind of do this a couple times, and each time adding a little bit more pressure to the areas where I want you to be able to see it. By using this blue nautical colour, again, it's not anything that's sort of jumping off the page. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted a little bit of background detail. So the next thing I'm going to stamp is just a couple of seagulls just in the background, and I am actually going to use my black memento for this. So they are going to stand out a little bit more. So obviously that's a black ink pad that I'll be using. They are going to stand out, but I'm not kind of going for sort of a heavy print here. I'm just really lightly touching the page. So those few elements do kind of stand out and stick out a little bit more. So I do use both of the seagull stamps in this way, and you can see I've just added 4 birds onto this card, and I think it just kind of, again, adds that little bit of detail to the background. So next, let's take a look at how we're actually going to kind of put this card together. So I know that I wanted to have this ship sort of off to the side a little bit, sort of kind of covering our lighthouse image. That's why, like I said, I wasn't that worried about how well that image sort of stood out or anything, because I just want it to be in the background. Now we can start putting this card together. So as you can see here, I have covered the back of our panel with foam squares. So if you've got something sort of bigger foam squares, unfortunately at the moment this is all I've got is these small ones. So I have covered the back of it to support it sort of as much as possible. And I'm just going to put this onto our card. So this is a 7 by 5 inch card. And I've just cut our background panel just down slightly, so we've got that nice white border all the way around. What I have already done is put some foam on the back of our silver frame, and that's going to stand up sort of roughly the same height as our background. So what we can do now is just put our porthole with its sentiment in the center of this, and to get it in the center, I'm going to use that frame as a little guide to make sure that it's in the right place. And then I'm just lining up the sentiment inside just to make sure that it's straight. So now that I've got that in, I can peel up the frame, and then I can take the adhesive off that frame and get that stuck down as well. So this is how our card is looking so far, and I'm really loving it. I really love that background. I think it's worked perfectly, and I love how this is all coming together, and I've not had to pick up an alcohol marker at all, and I really love that. So I'm just popping down now the extra images that we've stamped, so putting that boat down. So I'm just overlaying it across the lighthouse image and then our frame as well, and I think that looks really nice. I think that's a really great positioning for it. And then I'm just adding in that starfish and those shells as well. And that last shell I just pop on a foam pad just to give it that extra bit of dimension. I really love how this card has come out. I think having all those images of this worked so well together, and those different kind of techniques and things that we've done has really kind of brought everything together. So this isn't the typical kind of card that I would create, to be honest. It's not necessarily a stamp set that I would buy normally, but I really love sort of getting these stamp sets and being able to create something completely different to what I normally do. So now I'm going to make a super quick second card by using that circle that we cut out of our background. So I think this background is too pretty not to use for another card, and if you've got sort of leftovers like this, it's perfect for creating that second card, possibly using that same theme. So for this card here, what I'm actually going to do is use our seahorse die, and I'm going to cut that again from the silver cardstock that I used to create the frame for our last card. So I really wanted to, again, keep in that theme, using the embossing powder that I did, because you can see a little bit of it on this circle. I've run that die through my die cutter machine, and now I'm just poking out all of the sort of extra pieces that need to come out of our die cut. So you could, and something I think would look really nice would be to put these pieces back into it, so paper piece this. But for me personally, those pieces are so small, I don't think that's ever going to be something that I'm going to do. But I'm sure that would look really nice, especially if you used a different colour. But for this card now, all I'm going to do is keep it really quick, basic and simple, and just use this seahorse just exactly as it is. The next thing I'm going to do is stamp a sentiment directly onto this circle. So I'm going to find the position that I'm going to put my seahorse. So I don't want to cover up sort of too much of that nice design that we've got with sort of the speckles and things. But I still need to be mindful that I want you to be able to read the sentiment that I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to use my stamping platform for this, and then I'm going to stamp this sentiment. So the sentiment that I've picked for this particular card is Enjoy Life's Journey. And I'm going to ink this using this black tuxedo memento ink pad, and then I am going to heat emboss this with some clear embossing powder just to make sure that that sort of stays nice and crisp, and again gives it a little bit of shine, a little bit of dimension to our card. With the heat embossing completed, I can now go ahead and start assembling this card. So as I am fresh out of all of my must-have supplies, I am using this double-sided tape and just going around this circle to get some good adhesive on it. And then I'm going to place that in the centre, but towards the top of the card, so you can see our stamped sentiment there. is in a really great position, so sort of bottom right hand side, and that leaves a perfect amount of space to add our silver seahorse. And again, that sort of blends in really nicely with that embossing powder that we've used on the background. So I'm just using this Crafter's Companion Dotty tape pen. So this tape runner is perfect if you've got images like this which are fine in detail, if it's got a lot of sort of gaps in it and things. Because it's a dotty tape pen, it's not continuous, it means that you won't see the adhesive through the gaps. I decided to keep the seahorse within that circle. I was going to sort of lay it just outside of it, so it's kind of half on, half off the circle, but I really love that and the sentiment is sort of all within that circle. So that's our second card all finished. So again, a really quick and simple card by purely just using the offcuts from a previous project. So here are our two finished cards that we've made in today's video using this Nautical Collection stamp set and die. And I really love the way that this has come out. So again, this isn't a normal stamp set that I would purchase myself, but now that I've got it, I know that I can create some really fun projects with it for lots of different occasions. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you some inspiration and a couple more ideas of what you can do using this stamp set and die. And this is from the Simply Cards and Papercraft issue 207 magazine. If you did like this video, then please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, then please do so you don't miss out on any future videos. This particular magazine has given me at least 5 other video ideas. So if you do subscribe, it means you won't miss out on any of those videos. So thanks very much for stopping by and happy crafting.